Title: The Forbidden Love. Chapter 1. Sienna crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, her pulse hammering in her ears. The dockyard lights cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt, transforming the deserted area into a maze of darkness. Her earpiece crackled to life, breaking the silence. "Target is in position," came the low voice of Carter, her team's field lead. "We move on my signal. Everyone stay sharp." Sienna's fingers tightened around the grip of her Glock as she peered through the narrow gap between the containers. A convoy of black SUVs had just rolled into the docking zone, with polished exteriors. Men in dark tactical gear alighted from the vehicles. The Black Veil's reputation for ruthlessness was well-earned, and tonight, they were here for a shipment. She exhaled slowly. The plan was simple: intercept the shipment, gather intel, and get out before anyone realized they'd been compromised. But simple rarely meant easy, especially when Damien Cole was involved. Sienna's gaze shifted to the cargo ship docked nearby, its massive cranes towering overhead. The ship was the source of the shipment, a secret exchange of weapons and classified technology. If her team could intercept it, they'd have leverage against Damien Cole. "Something's not right," she whispered into her comms. "Stay focused," Carter replied. "We've trained for this. Stick to the plan." The first sign of trouble came with the sound of approaching footsteps. Sienna froze. A group of armed men appeared, escorting a tall figure dressed in a sleek, tailored suit. Damien Cole. Sienna's jaw tightened. Of course, he would be here. Damien never left anything to chance, especially not a deal this significant. She watched as he exchanged brief nods with the Black Veil's leader, a gray-headed man with a scar running down the side of his face. "Eyes on Damien," she murmured into the comms. "He's heading toward the shipment." "Copy that," Carter said. "On my signal, we move." Just as Carter raised his hand to give the signal, gunfire shattered the stillness, the sharp cracks echoing off the containers. Sienna ducked as bullets bounced around her. She glanced up to see masked figures emerging from the shadows, their weapons trained on both the Black Veil and Damien's men. "Ambush!" Carter shouted. "Everyone, fall back!" Sienna's fired at the attackers. The dockyard had become a war zone, with gunfire and shouts filling the night. Through the chaos, she spotted Damien taking cover behind a stack of crates. Their eyes met briefly. He wasn't just a target anymore, he was a player in the game. "Ms." His voice cut through the noise. "Unless you want to die tonight, I suggest you move." Before she could respond, a grenade landed a few feet away. Without thinking, Damien lunged toward her, grabbing her arm and pulling her behind a container just as the explosion rocked the ground. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded. "Saving your life," Damien replied. "You're welcome." Sienna stared at him, but there was no time to argue. The attackers had military training, so whoever they were, they had come prepared to eliminate everyone at the dockyard. "We need to move," Damien said. "Your team can't hold them off much longer." "And you think I'm just going to trust you?" she shot back. "You don't have a choice," he said. "I know these men. They're not here for you or me. They're here to clean the house. If we don't work together, we're both dead." Reluctantly, Sienna nodded. She hated the idea of relying on Demaya. They moved through the maze of containers. As they reached the edge of the dockyard, a new wave of attackers appeared, cutting off their escape. Damien raised his weapon. Sienna followed. "Up there," Damien said, nodding toward a crane with a ladder leading to its control cabin. "We can get a better vantage point." Sienna followed him. The climb was exhausting, but they reached the cabin without incident. From their elevated position, they had a clear view of the chaos below. "This isn't just a simple ambush," Damien said. "They're here to eliminate witnesses. That includes us." "And how do you know that?" Sienna asked. They're efficient and they don't leave loose ends. Sienna stared at him. You brought this on us. I didn't bring them here, Damien countered. But I know how they operate. If we can distract them long enough, we might have a chance to escape. Sienna knew he was right. They had to focus on surviving first. Questions could come later. Together, they came up with a plan, using the crane's controls to create a diversion. The heavy machinery roared to life, its movements drawing the attackers' attention away from their position. As the chaos below intensified, Damien and Sienna made their move, descending the crane and slipping through the shadows toward the dockyard's perimeter. By the time they reached a safe distance, Sienna was exhausted, her body aching from the ordeal. Damien, on the other hand, seemed composed. This isn't over, she said. You saved me tonight, but don't think for a second that I trust you. I wouldn't expect you to, Damien replied. But you'll need me, MS? Lane, Sienna replied. Well, Ms. Lane, whether you like it or not, you'll need me. Sienna said nothing. The night had revealed more than she had bargained for, and she knew the road ahead would only grow darker. But one thing was certain. The game was far from over, and Damien Cole was no longer just an adversary. He was a mystery, and a dangerous one at that. Chapter 2. Sienna leaned against the cold wall of the abandoned warehouse, her breathing steadying as the adrenaline decreased. Across the room, Damien stood by a table littered with maps, blueprints, and documents. His sharp suit, now dirted and torn. You've been awfully quiet, Damien remarked. Not like you. Sienna shot him a sharp glance. Maybe I'm just tired of this game. Oh, come now, he said. I thought you loved puzzles. I prefer puzzles where I know the rules, she retorted, crossing her arms. Damien chuckled. Life doesn't come with a rulebook, Ms. Lane. Surely you've figured that out by now. She wanted to argue, to tell him he had no right to lecture her. But the truth was, he wasn't wrong. Nothing about the last 48 hours had gone according to plan, and now she was trapped in a partnership with the very man she was supposed to be taking down. Damien moved to the table, picking up a folder marked with a red seal. If you're ready to stop sulking, I have something to show you. Sienna pushed off the wall. What is it? A glimpse behind the curtain, he said, holding the folder just out of reach. But it comes with a price. Of course it does, she muttered. What's the catch? You trust me. Sienna stared at him. But there was something in his eyes that made her pause. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Fine. Show me. Damien handed her the folder, stepping back as she opened it. Inside were photographs and financial records. At first glance, it looked like evidence of his criminal empire. But as she dug deeper, the pieces didn't add up. These transactions, she said, pointing to a ledger entry. They're not for weapons or drugs. They're funding relief efforts? Damien nodded. Disaster zones. Refugee camps. Underground movements fighting against oppression. Sienna's brow furrowed as she flipped through the documents. Why? What's in it for you? Not everything is about profit, Damien said. Sometimes it's about power, the power to change the world when no one else will. Sienna didn't know whether to be impressed or horrified. This man, this criminal mastermind, was using his ill-gotten gains to fund causes most governments wouldn't touch. It was noble in a twisted, morally ambiguous way. You're still breaking the law, she said. You've hurt people. And so have you, Damien countered. Don't pretend your hands are clean, Ms. Lane. You've made sacrifices, taken risks. What makes you think you're any different from me? I don't do it for personal gain, she snapped. Neither do I, he said. You see villains, I see necessary evils. The world isn't black and white, Lane. It never has been. She looked away. Deep down, she knew he was right. The world was messy, complicated, and filled with gray areas. But accepting that didn't make it any easier to reconcile her growing respect for Damien with the mission that had brought her here. "I need some air," she said, turning toward the door. "Don't wander too far," Damien called after her. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. Sienna leaned against the railing of the fire escape, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled like stars, masking the corruption and chaos that lay beneath. It was beautiful and deceptive, much like the man inside. She heard the creak of the metal staircase and turned to see Damien approaching, a flask in hand. He offered it to her. She took a sip. The whiskey burned her throat, grounding her in the moment. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, handing the flask back. Damien raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad?" "Complicated." He smiled, taking a sip of his own. "That's the first honest thing you've said all night." They stood in silence for a while. Sienna hated how easy it was to let her guard down around him, how natural it felt to share these stolen moments. But she couldn't afford to forget who he was, or who she was. "What happens now?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Now," Damien said, "we find who is responsible for the ambush." Sienna frowned. "You think someone on your side betrayed you?" "I'm not sure," he said. "And whoever it is, they're playing both of us." If there was a third player in this game, it changed everything. The ambush at the dock, the attacks on both their teams, it all pointed to someone pulling the strings from the shadows. "Any leads?" she asked. "Plenty," Damien said. "But nothing concrete. Yet." Sienna nodded. She didn't trust Damien, but for now, their goals aligned. They needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. Damien headed back inside, leaving Sienna outside. She stood up, then her phone rang. It was a call from her agency confirming if she had successfully infiltrated Damien's group and gained his trust. She nodded yes, but she was later told that Carter was nowhere to be found. Carter had been her confidant for as long as she can remember, but she couldn't let it show, so she kept her calm. Sienna couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping deeper into a web of lies, one that might consume her if she wasn't careful. Damien Cole was dangerous, unpredictable, and annoyingly compelling. And whether she liked it or not, he had become an important part of her story. Chapter 3. Sienna paced nervously across the dusty warehouse floor. She turned to Damien, who was leaning against a rusted metal pillar, deep in thought. "What are we going to do now?" she asked. Damien took a deep breath, pausing as if searching for the right words. "We need to find out who's behind this, but to do that, we have to follow the shipment." Sienna frowned, folding her arms. "What exactly is this tech weapon we're dealing with?" Damien straightened up. A few years ago, a group of scientists were experimenting with animal mind control. It was groundbreaking research, using nanotechnology to influence behavior. They succeeded and decided to take it a step further, testing it on humans. It was supposed to be revolutionary, but one of the scientists exposed the project, warning against its dangers. The program was shut down, but shortly after, the scientists started disappearing one by one. Then, a few weeks ago, it caught my attention again. A top government agent went rogue and nearly killed his handler. He hung himself while in custody, and during the autopsy, they found nanobots in his bloodstream, programmed to control his mind. It's not just a weapon. It's a bioweapon capable of turning anyone into a puppet. Someone listed it on the dark web, and I bought it, hoping to keep it out of the wrong hands. But apparently, someone else wanted it just as badly. Sienna's eyes widened as she processed the implications. We didn't know it was this dangerous. The only intel we got was to intercept a dangerous weapon, but we weren't told what it was. Damien chuckled. Whoever set us up has money and connections. The ambush wasn't random. And to pull that off, they'd need resources far beyond the average black market operator. Sienna nodded. So, what's the plan? We go back to where it all started, the docks. We might find clues about the shipment's destination. But tonight, we rest. Damien sat by the edge of the warehouse, staring into the darkness. His mind was full of thoughts, betrayals, the lives lost, and the weapon they needed to stop. He barely noticed when Sienna approached. Lost in thought, she asked, settling beside him. He smiled faintly, just trying to piece it all together. They began talking, sharing stories of past missions, victories, and regrets. As the conversation deepened, the space between them disappeared. Their lips met, but Damien pulled away first. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. The next morning, they returned to the docks, sifting through the remnants of the ambush. Amid the dirts, Damien found traces of the bioweapon scattered across a shattered crate. He carefully collected samples, and they headed back to his fortified mansion. In his lab, Damien analyzed the nanobot fragments. These bots communicate with each other, he explained, holding up a sample. They emit a unique signal. If we can trace it, we might find the shipment. Hours later, their efforts paid off. The signal led them to a heavily secured warehouse downtown. Damien's team, armed and ready, joined them for the assault. The guards outside were taken down swiftly, but inside was a different story. The inner defenses were well-trained and well-armed. Gunfire echoed through the building as Damien and Sienna led the charge. When the dust settled, what they found was more horrifying than they had imagined. In several sections of the warehouse, the bioweapon was being tested on human subjects. Some victims sat, their eyes motionless, while others convulsed violently, their bodies rejecting the nanobots. Sienna's stomach churned as she recognized a few operatives among the captives. She said nothing, her cover too critical to risk exposure. At the heart of the warehouse, they found Carter, the man behind the ambush. Why Carter? Sienna demanded. Why would you do this? Carter leaned casually against a table. It's for the good of the nation. Think about it. No more risking the lives of our agents. Instead, we use those who are condemned to die, prisoners, outcasts. They do the dirty work and no one bats an eye. It's efficient. Efficient? Sienna spat. You're playing God with people's lives. And what happens if they're caught? Or worse, if the tech falls into the wrong hands? Carter shrugged. Collateral damage. It's a small price to pay for progress. Fury burned in Sienna's eyes as she stepped forward, her fist raised, but Damien held her back. Carter's smile widened. You think you're so righteous? Tell Damien the truth, Sienna. Tell him about your real mission. Damien froze. What is he talking about? Carter laughed. She's been working for me, Damien. Tracking you, gathering intel, getting close to you. It was all part of the plan to take you down. Isn't that right, Sienna? Damien turned to her. Is it true? He asked. I can explain, she began, but he stepped back, shaking his head. Carter seized the moment. You see, Damien, you can't trust anyone. And just so you know, I'm just the face of this operation. There are others, powerful people, who won't stop until their goals are achieved. Even now, reinforcements are on their way. Chapter 4. The tension in the room was suffocating. Sienna stood rooted to the spot, Damien's piercing gaze burning into her. She had faced countless dangerous situations before, but nothing compared to the icy dread coursing through her veins now. You lied to me, Damien said. Sienna opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, and with it, the trust she and Damien had built. I trusted you, Sienna, Damien continued, stepping closer. I let you into my world, into my mind, and this is how you repay me? I didn't have a choice, she finally said. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Oh, but it did, he shot back. And now I'm left wondering how much of it was real. Was any of it real? She wanted to tell him the truth, that her feelings for him had complicated everything. But the words felt heavy, tangled in her throat. You don't understand, she said, taking a cautious step forward. This mission. Mission, Damien interrupted. So that's all I was to you? A mission? No, Sienna exclaimed. Damien, it's not that simple. Before she could finish, Damien slammed his fist into the table, sending papers and maps scattering to the floor. Don't lie to me anymore, Sienna. I deserve the truth. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I work for an agency that's been investigating you for years. My job was to infiltrate your operation, to find evidence and take you down. But things changed, Sienna continued. I started to see the man behind the empire. The one who risks everything to fight against corruption, who cares about the people no one else will help. I didn't expect to feel this way. Damien's shoulders sagged slightly. And yet, you still lied, he said finally. I didn't know how to tell you, she admitted. I was scared. Of losing your trust, of jeopardizing everything. Damien let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Well, congratulations. You managed to do both. Sienna took another step closer. Damien, I know I've hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But right now, we have bigger problems. Our enemies are closing in, and they won't stop until we're dead. You think I don't know that? Damien snapped. I've been playing this game longer than you've been alive, Sienna. I don't need your pity or your warnings. It's not pity. It's the truth. Whether you like it or not, we're in this together now. And if we don't trust each other, we're both as good as dead. Damien stared at her for a long moment. Finally, he turned away. This changes everything, he muttered. It doesn't have to, Sienna said, taking a tentative step closer. Damien, I know you don't believe me right now, but I'm on your side. Whatever happens, I'll stand with you. He turned back to her. Why should I believe you? Because I've had every opportunity to betray you, and I haven't, she said. Because I could have walked away, but I didn't. And because despite everything, she stopped herself. You what? Damien pressed. I care about you, she said finally. Damien looked as though he might say something, but before he could, the sound of approaching vehicles confirmed Carter's words. Damien's team quickly fortified their position, preparing for another battle. Looks like friends of Carter have found us, Damien said, pulling a gun from his holster. Seems so, Sienna shot back, grabbing her own weapon. Enemies stormed the warehouse. Amid the gunfire and explosions, Carter slipped away, leaving Damien and Sienna to face the onslaught. Sienna and Damien both dove for cover as bullets ripped through the walls and windows. Outside, the unmistakable roar of engines signaled the arrival of more enemy strike team. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos and violence. Sienna and Damien fought side by side, despite the turmoil between them. They covered each other's backs. Damien fought hard, but his focus wavered every time he glanced at Sienna. She fought beside him, desperate to prove her loyalty. When the dust finally settled, the warehouse was silent once more, but Carter was gone. Sienna leaned against a crate, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Damien stood nearby, his face shadowed, but his eyes locked on her. This isn't over, he said finally. I know, she replied, meeting his gaze. They stood in silence. Then they moved closer, their faces mere inches apart. Sienna felt her heart hammering in her chest as Damien reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek. She didn't pull away, didn't resist the pull of his presence. Damn it, Sienna, he muttered before closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss. When they finally pulled apart, Sienna's cheeks were flushed, her breath coming in short gasps. But neither of them moved away. Whatever happens next, Damien said, we face it together. Sienna nodded. Together. As the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, they prepared for the battle ahead, their fates intertwined in a web of lies, love, and betrayal that neither could escape. Damien's team regrouped, Sienna stood alone. She knew she had to earn back his trust, not just for the mission, but for the connection they had shared. Meanwhile, Carter reported to his superiors, confident that Damien and Sienna were too fractured to pose a threat. But he underestimated them. Chapter 5. The warehouse was quiet now. Sienna stood motionless, the weight of Carter's betrayal crushing her. Damien scanned the room as his men secured the remaining evidence and evacuated the few survivors from the nanobot experiments. "He's gone," Damien said. Carter escaped, and he has allies, powerful ones. Sienna nodded. If Carter's just the face, that means we're dealing with a network. We have to find the others before they cover their tracks or escalate their plans. Damien glanced at her. Despite everything, he trusted her, even if his instincts told him to be cautious. "We'll start by tracking Carter. If he's the key, he'll lead us to the rest." One of Damien's men approached. "Boss, we found something in the back office. Files, encrypted drives, and this." He handed Damien a black thumb drive. Sienna leaned closer. "That could be everything we need: locations, contacts, operations plans." Damien pocketed the drive. "We'll find out soon enough. Let's get back to the mansion. It's not safe here." Back at the mansion, Damien's tech team worked quickly to crack it. Sienna paced the room, her mind still on Carter's parting words. Top officials are involved. She knew the rot went deep, but this revelation confirmed it was worse than she'd imagined. The screen blinked to life. A series of names, dates, and locations flooded the monitor. Sienna's recognized several names: senators, high-ranking military officials, and even prominent business leaders. "This isn't just corruption," Sienna muttered. "It's treason." Damien's jaw tightened. And Carter's been their puppet all along. He tapped a location highlighted on the screen. It's their next meeting point. A secure bunker outside the city. We'll hit it before they can regroup. Sienna hesitated. "They'll be expecting us. If they're this well connected, they'll have contingencies in place." Damien leaned back in his chair. "Then we'll outthink them. Let them believe they're untouchable. That's when they make mistakes." 2 days later, under the cover of darkness, Damien and Sienna led a small, elite team toward the bunker. Surveillance drones had confirmed heightened activity in the area, guards patrolling the perimeter, delivery trucks coming and going. "Intel says this is where they're planning their next move," Damien whispered, adjusting his earpiece. "We go in silent. No alarms, no mess." The team split into pairs, taking out perimeter guards. Sienna moved like a shadow. Damien couldn't help but admire her focus, even as they infiltrated deeper into enemy territory. Inside, the bunker was a maze of corridors and high-tech labs. They found more evidence of the nanobot program: vials of the bioweapon, schematics for distribution devices, and documents outlining targets for mind-controlled operatives. "We have to destroy this," Sienna said. Damien nodded. "But not before we extract every piece of intel we can. We need to know who's behind this." Suddenly, a voice crackled through the loudspeakers. "Welcome, Damien. Sienna." It was Carter. Carter's voice was calm, mocking. "Did you really think you could walk into my house uninvited? I've been waiting for this moment." Doors slammed shut around them, and an alarm blared. Sienna cursed under her breath. "It's a trap." Damien smirked. "No, it's an opportunity." His men worked quickly, planting explosives on key infrastructure points while Damien and Sienna made their way to the control room. Carter's voice continued taunting them, but Damien remained unfazed. They burst into the control room, guns drawn, only to find it empty. Instead, a monitor on, displaying Carter's face. "I admire your determination," Carter said, "but this ends here." The screen went dark, and the room began to fill with gas. Damien pulled Sienna out of the room just in time, both of them coughing as they stumbled into the hallway. His men were already retreating, the bunker's alarms deafening. "Detonators are set," one of his men shouted. "Go," Damien ordered. The team barely made it out before the explosives detonated, reducing the bunker to rubble. But Carter's absence was a bitter reminder that their fight was far from over. Back at the mansion, the team had gathered all the data they could before the explosion, but it wasn't enough. "He's still out there," Sienna said. "And so are his allies," Damien added. "But we've sent them a message. They're not untouchable." As they sifted through the recovered data, a pattern began to emerge: shipment routes, financial transactions, and a list of high-profile targets. "They're planning something big," Sienna said. "Something that could destabilize the entire country." Damien placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we stop them. Together." Chapter 6. In an underground bunker, Carter stood in the heart of a massive control room filled with glowing monitors and holographic projections. His engineers and technicians worked feverishly, finalizing the launch of a global nanobot control program. With a sinister grin, Carter addressed his team. Phase 1 of Operation Dominion begins in less than 48 hours. Soon, entire cities will kneel without a single shot fired. The world will bow to us. At the center of the room was a cylindrical glass chamber containing millions of nanobots suspended in a blue liquid. A high-frequency pulse emitted from the chamber, activating the prototype mind control devices worn by test subjects locked in nearby cells. The subjects' eyes glowed a faint blue. Carter's second-in-command approached. "Sir, the delivery system is ready. The drones will release the nanobots into major cities within hours." Carter nodded. The age of free will is over. Damien, Sienna, and their small team of elite operatives gathered around a digital map glowing on a holographic table. Damien's tech expert, Cole, had finally cracked the encrypted data retrieved from the warehouse. "I've pinpointed the location of Carter's main base," Cole announced. "It's in an abandoned missile silo 50 miles outside the city." Sienna leaned forward. "If they launch the nanobots, it's game over. We have to stop them before they deploy." Damien nodded. "This won't be easy. Carter's expecting us. He's got resources, manpower, and home field advantage. But we've got no choice." As the team geared up, Damien approached Sienna. "I trust you have my back in there," he said softly. Sienna met his gaze. "Always." The team arrived under the cover of darkness, approaching the heavily guarded base through a series of underground tunnels. Damien led the way. The first wave of guards was taken out silently, but as they moved deeper, the alarm sounded. Red lights flashed, and an army of mercenaries swarmed. Gunfire erupted, and the team fought fiercely, using every ounce of their training to push forward. Inside the control room, Carter watched the chaos unfold on his monitors. He smirked, tapping his earpiece. "Release the enhanced units." From hidden doors, a group of test subjects, enhanced with nanobots, emerged. The battle intensified as the team struggled against the superhuman adversaries. Sienna found herself separated from the group, cornered by 2 enhanced guards. She fought valiantly, but she was outnumbered. Just as one of them lunged at her, Damien appeared, taking them down with precise shots. "Didn't I say I'd always have your back?" he quipped, smirking despite the tension. The team breached the control room, but Carter was waiting. "You're too late," he said, gesturing to the countdown timer on the central monitor. "In 5 minutes, the drones will launch, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Sienna stepped forward, her pistol aimed at Carter. "It's over, Carter. You can't win." Carter laughed. "You think I did this alone? I have senators, generals, and CEOs backing me. You take me down, 10 more will rise in my place." Sienna smirked, pulling out a small device. "Actually, I've already taken them down." She pressed a button, and a holographic screen appeared, showing a live feed of FBI agents storming offices, mansions, and secret hideouts. Each high-ranking official involved in Carter's operation was being arrested. "You're bluffing," Carter sneered. "Check your comms," Sienna replied. "They're not answering, are they?" Carter's face twisted in rage. In a last-ditch effort, he pulled a gun and fired at Sienna. Damien moved faster than she could react, shoving her out of the way and taking the bullet in his shoulder. "Damien!" Sienna cried, catching him as he stumbled. Carter took advantage of the distraction, activating the base's self-destruct sequence. "If I'm going down, I'm taking all of you with me," he shouted, fleeing toward the launch chamber. Despite his injury, Damien pushed forward with Sienna and the team. They caught up with Carter in the launch chamber, where the nanobot-filled drones were moments from deploying. The fight was brutal. Carter, desperate and cornered, fought like a man with nothing to lose. Damien and Sienna worked in together, taking down guards and dodging Carter's attacks. As the countdown reached its final seconds, Sienna managed to disable the drone's launch mechanism while Damien confronted Carter. "You lost, Carter," Damien said. Carter lunged at Damien, but Sienna intervened, delivering a devastating blow that sent Carter crashing into the control panel. Sparks flew, and the chamber began to collapse. "Time to go," Damien shouted, grabbing Sienna's hand as the team fled the crumbling base. Explosions erupted around them, and they barely made it out before the entire facility was engulfed in flames. Standing outside, watching the fiery destruction, Sienna turned to Damien. "You saved my life back there." He shrugged, wincing as he clutched his injured shoulder. "What can I say? I'm a sucker for a good team." With Carter dead and the nanobot technology destroyed, the city was safe for now. "I never thought I'd say this," Damien began, "but teaming up with you wasn't half bad." Sienna smirked. "Coming from you, I'll take that as a glowing review." They shared a quiet laugh before Sienna grew serious. "There's still so much corruption out there. Carter was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle." Damien nodded. "Then I guess we've got work to do." Together, they vowed to use their unique skills and resources to fight against corruption, protect their city, and ensure that no one else would ever suffer from the horrors they had witnessed.